Chandler has submitted a proposal under Standing Order 75 today, which has been circulated and is shown on the dynamic red. Is consideration of the proposal supported? It being supported with the concurrence of the Senate, the clerks will set the clocks in line with informal arrangements made by the whips, and I call Senator Chandler.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. In September 2022, the world watched in horror as Mahsa Amini died in the custody of the Islamic Republic of Iran regime's so-called morality police. Her death sparked a global outcry, and here in this chamber it sparked action. Shortly after the uprisings and following obscene brutality from the IRI regime towards its own citizens, particularly women and girls, this Senate referred the situation in Iran to the Senate Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade References Committee for an inquiry which I had the honour of chairing. That inquiry wasn't just about documenting atrocities, it was about demanding action to ensure that our government holds the IRI regime to account for its abhorrent actions against Iranians, both in Iran and here in Australia. Now, the report from that inquiry made 12 recommendations. 2 were the most critical. List the IRGC as a terrorist organisation and reduce diplomatic ties with the Iranian regime. That was February 2023. The Albanese government could have taken action then. Instead, they waited until yesterday, 2.5 years on, to finally do so. Now, we in the Coalition welcome yesterday's announcement, but here today I want to step through exactly what happened while the Albanese government dragged its feet in taking the action we all know has come far too late. We now know that in the middle of January 2023, the government was preparing to list the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, as a terrorist organisation. The threat was known, the evidence was clear, and the Attorney-General's Department was in possession of 2 documents, a statement of reasons and a nomination form to list the IRGC as a terrorist organisation. What we also know is that on the 31st of January 2023, the day before the Foreign Affairs Committee was due to table its report, that same department made a late submission to the committee stating that it had determined the IRGC couldn't be listed under the current legislative regime because it was determined to be the organ of a nation-state. The next month, in February 2023, the then Minister for Home Affairs, Claire O'Neill, publicly attributed a foreign interference attempt to the IRI regime. The Coalition responded immediately and offered bipartisan support to the government for any legislative change required to allow the IRGC to be listed as a terrorist organisation. But those offers were ignored and the opportunity to act decisively was missed. 6 months later, on the 13th of September 2023, just days before the anniversary of Mahsa Amini's death, the government finally tabled its response to the Senate inquiry and made it clear that it would be rejecting those 2 key recommendations. I would have thought that moment, the anniversary of Mahsa Amini's death, could have inspired action. Instead, it exposed indifference on behalf of this government. And it is a moment that the Iranian diaspora will remember, not for courage, but for cowardice. Then we know came the 7th of October terror attacks in Israel. Hamas launched its brutal attack on Israeli citizens. The IRGC's role in training and financing Hamas is well documented, but still the Albanese government refused to act. Now, this Senate did not let the matter rest. In November 2023 and again in February 2024, we ordered the production of those documents I mentioned, prepared by the Attorney-General's Department. Those documents contained the statement of reasons for listing the IRGC before the idea was kiboshed by someone else in government. Exactly who that was, we don't yet know. Now, on both occasions, when the Senate asked for those documents, the Attorney-General claimed public interest immunity and the government continued to stall. Then, in October last year, 1 year on from the October 7 attacks, I moved a matter of urgency in this chamber and I called on the government to list the IRGC as a terrorist organisation and declare the Iranian ambassador persona non grata. And we must remember that members of this government said in this chamber that moving that motion was, and I quote, utterly reckless and irresponsible. But a few days later, the consequences of that same inaction became tragically clear, because on the 20th of October last year, we now know that the IRGC orchestrated a terrorist attack on Australian soil, on the Lewis Continental Kitchen in Bondi, and in December they targeted the Adass Israel Synagogue in Melbourne. Now, these were not isolated incidents. They didn't come out of nowhere. The reach and threat of the IRGC on Australian soil was long-standing, and the government had every reason to act, and it chose not to. Now, when foreign agents orchestrate violence on Australian soil, the rules of engagement have to change. Our response must be swift, it must be firm, and it must be unequivocal. Finally, yesterday, the Prime Minister announced that the IRGC will finally be listed as a terrorist organisation under Australian law, and I welcome this. But let's be clear, the listing's overdue, the delays put lives at risk, and it must never happen again.
Your time has expired. Senator Stewart.
Thank you, Deputy President. The Prime Minister, Foreign Minister and Home Affairs Minister yesterday announced that ASIO had enough credible intelligence to reach a deeply disturbing conclusion that the Iranian government has directed at least 2 anti-Semitic attacks on Australian soil. Iran has sought to undermine the cohesion of our community with acts of aggression that sought to terrify Australians and put Australian lives in danger. This has crossed the line. That's why the government has declared Iran's ambassador to Australia persona non grata, as well as 3 other Iranian officials. The government has taken the step to withdraw Australia's ambassador to Iran, and we have suspended the operations of our embassy in Iran for the safety of our officials and Australia's broader security. This is the first time Australia has expelled an ambassador in the post-war period. The government will also legislate to list Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, as a terrorist organisation. Now, when the Foreign Minister announced this yesterday, she said this: "We have sought to lower the temperature in Australia and not to reproduce the conflict in the Middle East in Australia. I again urge others to consider whether their actions help those who want to divide our nation. We all want the killing in the Middle East to stop, and we want to retain our character as a nation that welcomes people of different race, religion, views, united by respect for each other's humanity and our collective desire to live in peace. We will always safeguard our communities and protect Australians from all forms of hate." The Albanese Labor government knew that yesterday was not a day for division. But already today we have this debate. We have the Greens already in their statements using these horrific attacks for their own political purposes. The Greens political party are in no position to make lectures about Iran. We have heard from former Greens members about how Greens leaders ignore the oppressive role of Iran. We have heard that Greens leaders ignored the experiences of Iranian Australian members of the Greens and found their pain to be politically inconvenient. The Greens don't understand that Iran's support for Hamas has undermined and oppressed Palestinians. And then, at a time of unimaginable suffering in Gaza, continue with the same divisive politics here at home. The Albanese government has worked deliberately and strategically with partners to apply pressure on the Iranian regime. The Albanese government has sanctioned 200 Iranian-linked persons and entities, including almost 100 IRGC-linked individuals and entities. We were at the forefront of efforts to remove Iran from the Commission for the Status of Women and co-sponsored the successful Human Rights Council resolution establishing an independent investigation into human rights violations in Iran. We have bolstered Australia's autonomous sanctions framework to enable us to target more Iranian individuals and entities involved in oppression inside Iran, including against women and girls. We have consistently and forcefully raised our concerns directly with Iran. The Iranian regime's attack were designed to cause disunity and division in our country, and it is a terrible shame that the Greens political party cannot show unity today. In unprecedented times like we find ourselves in now, it's more important than ever that we leave party politics aside and take the side of Team Australia. We want people to feel safe and to be safe. That's why we will always safeguard our communities and protect Australians from all forms of hate. I join with Senator Wong, the Foreign Minister, in urging others in this place to consider whether their actions help those who want to divide our nation, and encourage everybody in this place to join Team Australia and work towards unity in our nation.
Thank you, Senator Stewart. Senator Hanson.
Thank you very much. Well, that was the most uninspiring speech, and I wondered if you really believed what you said. The Labor government's expulsion of the Iranian ambassador comes far too late for the victims of these crimes. For years, people who have escaped that hideous regime have been telling the Australian government about the illegal activities of the regime and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in our country, surveillance, intimidation, coercion, threats and the violence unleashed on our streets. ASIO should be commended for its excellent work in uncovering the links between the Iranian embassy and the attacks on the Australian community. ASIO should have been listened to much earlier when it made warnings about the regime and its activities. It turns out others should have been heard too. That includes One Nation. For years I've been warning about the threat of Iran and similar countries where radical Islam is dominant. In fact, only days after the terrorist attacks orchestrated by Iran against Israel in October 2023, I said, Australia must re-examine its relationship with the regime of Iran, the financier and supplier of Islamic terror across the world. At the very least, our diplomatic presence in Tehran must be withdrawn and any Iranian diplomats should be expelled from our country. I said that here almost 2 years ago. It also includes the Senate committee, which in February 2023 recommended the government take steps to list the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organisation. But Labor refused to listen, probably because Iran was doing exactly what the Labor left wanted them to do by attacking Israel. Labor has only now been embarrassed into taking action after ignoring the warnings and pretending Iran was no threat to Australia. I urge this incompetent government to act decisively and increase security resources so this may never happen again. And heed my warning, don't bring people from Gaza into this country.
Senator Hanson, your time's expired. Senator Blythe.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. More than 2 years ago, the Coalition urged the Albanese government to take decisive action and list Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, as a terrorist organisation. We did so because the evidence was overwhelming. The IRGC is not a conventional military force. It is a global exporter of terror, a sponsor of anti-Semitic violence and a direct threat to democratic societies, including our own. The case for listing the IRGC as a terrorist organisation rests on clear and compelling grounds. The IRGC is a key driver of global terrorism, directly funding, training and arming groups such as Hezbollah and Hamas. Its activities extend well beyond Iran's borders, threatening Jewish communities and undermining international security. Listing the IRGC as a terrorist organisation would have aligned with Australia with other allies, close legal and financial loopholes and deter extremism at home, and signal that state-sponsored terror will not be tolerated. Despite the calls to act and to act decisively, the Albanese government did nothing. They dismissed the danger. They turned their backs on bipartisan calls for action. And now, after confirmed anti-Semitic attacks on Australian soil, one targeting a synagogue in Melbourne and another a Jewish-owned restaurant in Sydney, the government has finally acted. It has expelled the Iranian ambassador, and it has also signalled that it will move to designate the IRGC as a terrorist organisation. These steps are welcome, but let me be clear, they should never have taken this long. This is not leadership, it is weakness. Iran has been exporting violence, sponsoring terror and fuelling hatred for years. Strong action was required long ago, not only to confront Tehran abroad, but to also send a clear signal here at home. Because while this government delayed, the consequences were felt on our own streets. We have witnessed a disturbing rise in anti-Semitism across Australia. I have spoken to Jewish families who feel unsafe in their schools, in their workplaces and in their places of worship. Terrorist incidents and the threat to Australian community is rising, and this is no coincidence. When government is weak on principle, extremists are emboldened. The failure to stand firmly and early with Israel has compounded this problem. Of course, legitimate criticism of Israel is reasonable. But that is a world apart from undermining Israel's very right to defend itself. Yet that is what this government has done. equivocating, delaying and, in effect, rewarding terrorism. Since October 2023, when 1,200 innocent Israelis were slaughtered by a racist totalitarianism, Israel has been fighting for its survival. It is a democracy under constant threat from Iran's proxies. Its right to defend itself is beyond question. And yet Labor's refusal to speak with clarity and conviction has implied sympathy for those who would seek to destroy it. That silence has emboldened extremism and intimidated Australians who would have felt confident to stand in solidarity with our ally. When Israel struck Iran's nuclear facilities to prevent a catastrophic escalation, Mr Albanese hesitated. He waited for the United States before he dared to act. That is not foreign policy, that is following the leader. And when Hamas praised Mr Albanese for recognising Palestinian statehood, he failed to condemn them. Has he forgotten that Hamas is a terrorist organisation? This government is not just soft on terror, it is soft on organised crime, it is soft on foreign interference, and it is soft on the enemies of democracy. And in being soft, it has portrayed the values that should define us as a free and just society. Yes, expelling the Iranian ambassador and signalling a move to finally list the IRGC are the right decisions. But Australians must not forget the cost of this government's hesitation. When leadership falters, hatred fills the vacuum, and the price has been paid by Jewish Australians who have been terrorised in their own homeland. We must take actions together against Tehran's networks. We must confront anti-Semitism wherever it appears, because if we do not stand strong with our democratic allies, we cannot expect them to stand strong with us should we face danger ourselves. The Coalition will never hesitate to call out terror, no matter where it comes from, no matter who it sponsors, and no matter how uncomfortable it makes this government feel.
Thank you, Senator Blyth. Senator Whittaker.
Thank you, Acting Deputy President. Yesterday, the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister and the Home Affairs Minister announced that ASIO has credible intelligence showing the Iranian government directed at least 2 anti-Semitic attacks on Australian soil, possibly more. I want to acknowledge the work of ASIO on this investigation and commend them for their commitment to protecting our national interests. Let me be clear, there is no place for anti-Semitism in our country. There is no place for violence or for aggression in our country. And there is no place for interference in our country. We cannot tolerate it. Acts of aggression such as these strike at the heart of our community and have no place in the Australian way of life. In response, the government has declared that Iran's ambassador to Australia is persona non grata, along with 3 other Iranian officials. It is the first time we have expelled an ambassador in the post-war period. These are not decisions that can be taken lightly. We have suspended the operations of our embassy in Iran for the safety of our officials and for the broader security of our nation. We will also legislate to list Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organisation. We take this matter very seriously. When the Foreign Minister joined the Prime Minister and the Home Affairs Minister to make this announcement yesterday, she said, and I quote, "We have sought to lower the temperature in Australia and to not reproduce the conflict in the Middle East. I again urge others to consider whether their actions help those who want to divide our nation. We all want the killing in the Middle East to stop, and we want to retain our character as a nation that welcomes people of different race, religion, views, united by respect for each other's humanity and our collective desire to live in peace. We will always safeguard our communities and protect Australians from all forms of hate." I encourage everyone in this place to reflect on those words from our Foreign Minister. This is not a time for division. Yesterday, the opposition leader said that the opposition was united with the government on the measures announced yesterday. But sadly, we're seeing them throw out this bipartisanship on this really serious matter. It's disappointing to see some in this place use this as an opportunity for political point scoring. Our government has taken decisive action on Iran. We have worked deliberately and strategically with our partners to apply pressure on the Iranian regime. The Albanese government has sanctioned 200 Iranian-linked persons and entities, including almost 100 IRGC-linked individuals and entities. Those opposite, when they were in government, did not place a single sanction. We led efforts to remove Iran from the Commission on the Status of Women, while those opposite said nothing. We co-sponsored the Human Rights Council's investigation into abuse inside Iran. We strengthened Australia's sanctions framework so we can better target Iranian officials who oppress their own people, including women and girls. We have consistently raised our concerns directly with Iran. We did this work carefully, with our partners, because that's how you apply real pressure on a dangerous regime. In speaking on this motion, I wish to remind those people who seek to use this issue for political benefit to reflect again on the words of the Foreign Minister yesterday. Consider whether your actions are helping. There is no place in our country for anti-Semitism or any other kind of hate and vitriol in our country. And stoking further fear and division in our community is no way to handle a situation like this. Iran's attacks were designed to sow hatred and fear here in Australia. It is our responsibility as leaders in this chamber, as leaders in our communities, to stand against this hate, to protect our communities and to defend our democracy. This government is taking anti-Semitism seriously. We take our national security seriously. We are protecting Australians. And we are sending a clear message to any state or actor who wishes to do us harm.
Thank you, Senator Whittaker. Senator Nabjeeva-Price.
Thank you, Acting Chair. The Coalition will not be lectured on how to tackle anti-Semitism in this country. The Albanese government thinks it's been on the front foot enlisting the IRGC as a terrorist organisation. Well, it thinks it's been strong, and it's had the gall to suggest the Coalition has politicised this issue while politicising it. But Australians aren't falling for this ruse. This government hasn't been on the front foot, it's been on the back foot. This government hasn't been strong, it's been weak. And from its first day in office, this government has politicised foreign policy issues to grandstand on domestic political audience. The crisis of anti-Semitism afflicting our nation started with the Albanese government's supine response to the sordid scenes on the footsteps of the Sydney Opera House. Its weakness in the wake of that intolerable incident created an atmosphere of permissibility for more intolerable incidents. As recently as the 3rd of August, some pro-Palestinian protesters gleefully carried a photo of Iran's oppressive dictator during the rally across the Sydney Harbour Bridge. The Prime Minister astonishingly described this event as a peaceful demonstration. When we hear the calls of bring down genocide, to stop genocide, well, let me tell you, Iran are for genocide. Iran is for the genocide of Israel. And when we hear Australians, and including those that sit in this chamber, chant from the river to the sea, they are calling for genocide. They are calling for terror. And yet the Albanese government has failed miserably to attack these sorts of calls for genocide within this country. Iran is a totalitarian state run by the odious, revolutionary and anti-Semitic Iranian regime. The regime oppresses its own people. The regime funds terrorists, Hamas, the Houthis, and everybody else involved that want to see harm come to not just Israel but to the West. I suggest that the Prime Minister, if he hasn't already, view the footage that I viewed in Israel of October 7. I can never erase it from my mind, seeing children, little boys, as young as 9, 10, run into a shelter while Hamas hurl a bomb and their father come after them, only for his body parts to be blown to smithereens. This is what Iran seeks.
This is what they sit gleefully and watch as hordes of Australians wave flags that support their symbols. The Albanese government has been weak, and the Australian people need to stand up once and for all against
Senator Nampijinpa-Price. Senator Scarr.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President, and I'm so pleased during the chair as I make my contribution on this debate, and I really want to emphasise the extraordinary role that Senator Chandler has played in terms of the prosecution of this debate, and your advocacy after leading the inquiry, the Senate inquiry which prepared the References Committee report calling for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to be declared a terrorist organisation and registered as such, was an outstanding piece of work, and then your continual advocacy over a number of years has provided hope, comfort and reassurance to our Iranian diaspora, and they deeply, deeply appreciate it. And it's something which I do hope you take with you long after you've left this place in terms of the positive impact you've had on the lives of some of our most vulnerable Australians. The IRGC should be declared a terrorist organisation because it is a terrorist organisation. And I've said those words multiple times in this chamber over a number of years, but also in conference rooms where I've met members of the Iranian diaspora, members of our Kurdish community, and talked about these issues. I had one such meeting in November last year, 3 weeks before the Adass Israel synagogue was burned to the ground. And after I had that meeting, which was public and in which I called for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to be declared a terrorist organisation, I received a letter from the Iranian ambassador. I received a letter from the ambassador on 4 December 2024. And the Iranian ambassador wanted, and I quote, to meet me for a fair and balanced informative discussion on different subjects, end quote. That was on 4 December. On 6 December, the Adass Israel synagogue was burned to the ground. I didn't meet the Iranian ambassador, who is now persona non grata. I didn't meet with him. I didn't need to meet with him because I'd met with wonderful members of our Iranian diaspora community, and they told me about the horrors which they'd fled from that were occurring in Iran, especially after the murder of Gina Amini, that wonderful, wonderful young lady in Iran in 2022. Senator Whittaker wanted to portray us on this side as trying to cause division on this issue. Now, Senator Whittaker wasn't here when we were having these debates during the last parliament, so I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. But I want to quote from the record on a resolution that was moved by Senator Chandler on 8 October 2024, in which she called for, about 2 months before the Adass Israel synagogue was burned to the ground, Senator Chandler called for listing the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organisation and declaring the current Iranian ambassador to Australia persona non grata. We were calling for this months, years before it occurred. So it's our duty to raise this issue in front of the Australian people and ask, why didn't it occur? Canada declared the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps a terrorist organisation. The United States declared it as such. Lithuania declared it as such. And we put it on the record and said, if there are issues with the law, talk to us, discuss it with us. Let's change the law. Change the law. And those entreaties were ignored. But worse than that, in that debate, this is what Senator Ayres said about Senator Chandler. And Senator Ayres should reflect on this and perhaps consider whether or not he should now make an apology. This is what he said. The fact that she, Senator Chandler, continues in this vein is contemptible. For somebody who seeks future leadership roles in foreign affairs and geostrategic affairs to continue with this line of argument while they have been briefed is utterly irresponsible, end quote. That's what Senator Ayres said about Senator Chandler. What do those remarks look like now? after the event? Well, I say this. Senator Chandler has shown every single attribute of a great leader in terms of foreign affairs and issues of geostrategic significance. She's shown outstanding leadership. She's shown the leadership which the people of Australia deserve, and Senator Chandler has shown the leadership the Iranian diaspora so greatly appreciates.